All right. How about we get started with our federal policy update this morning? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another NCIA educational webinar. I'm Bethany Moore, NCIA's Communications Manager at NCIA, and I'll be the moderator today. In this presentation, we'll cover the latest in federal policy news with NCIA's Director of Public Policy, Andrew Kline, and NCIA's Deputy Director of Government Relations, Michelle Rutter Friberg. NCIA's Director of Public Policy, Andrew Kline, will present an update on the federal cannabis policy issues taken up by NCIA's Policy Council, including vaping illnesses, highlights of the findings from the Illicit Market Summit, and comments to be submitted to the DEA and NIDA. We'll also explore the COVID-19 responses across the United States. Michelle Rutter Friberg, NCIA's Deputy Director of Government Relations, will share information about how to stay politically active on behalf of cannabis policy reform while still practicing physical distancing during the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll explore the impact that COVID-19 is having on small cannabis businesses, plus an update on action and movement we've seen in Congress, including a recent letter sent regarding small business administration loans for cannabis businesses. In case you couldn't hear the presentations at NCIA's Cannabis Caucus event series due to postponements, you can get those insights now and what's happening in Congress. Reminder again for our Facebook audience, please leave any questions in the comments and we'll see them. If you're on Twitter, tweet those comments and questions to NCIA.org. For those of you tuning in via Zoom, you can use that chat feature at the bottom to ask a question for Andrew or Michelle. So thanks to you both for taking time to join me and our viewers today so we can get up to date on what's happening in our industry.
Thanks for having us, Bethany. Great to be here.
Thanks, Bethany. Good morning, everyone.
Great, good morning. All right, so let's get started. First things first. Andrew, let's start by talking about the COVID-19 responses across the various states in the US.
So, it goes without saying that this is a rough time for our country and for the world. And while we deal with the health consequences of the coronavirus, there are also economic consequences as well. Opening day was supposed to be yesterday, postponed indefinitely. Airplanes are sitting on tarmacs, hotels are empty, casinos are closed, so are restaurants, so are bars, people are unemployed. Full industries are at risk. But cannabis is an outlier. All states that have cannabis programs at all have made cannabis available to consumers in some way or another. Medicinal is open, delivery is permitted, parking lot sales are permitted. The industry is finding a way. While we see sales down in other industries, according to Politico, sales were up in cannabis 120% this week. Stock prices are way up in cannabis. Aurora is up 19%, down most everywhere else. The S&P is down 3% today. Employment is up in cannabis and way down across other sectors. The industry is up. And while the federal government looks to offer bailouts for other industries, the cannabis industry stays strong on its own in the states. Once again, Colorado is leading. Governor Polis and ENC designated cannabis as essential right at the beginning. The governor's stay-at-home order exempts medical cannabis dispensaries and provides for adult sales curbside. But it's not just Colorado that's innovating. Almost all states with cannabis programs have deemed cannabis essential, and the tides are turning in our favor at the state level, if not at the federal level. Let's just take a quick look at a few of the innovators. Governor Ned Lamont in Connecticut, allowing doctors to issue medical cannabis recommendations via telemedicine. Governor Jay Inslee in Washington is allowing the deferment of taxes and waiving of penalties for marijuana businesses. And the Michigan governor allowed people to purchase marijuana using expired driver's licenses. As the industry accelerates, we're also seeing some businesses having some challenges, though, as well. One of our closest friends in the industry, Berkeley Patients Group, was hit hard by the mayor of Berkeley, who is now only allowing delivery. Berkeley Patients Group has been in business for 20 years. They've been serving medical patients for that long, but they don't do delivery. So they need our help right now. Please reach out and offer your support. We also need to remember that there are people sitting in prison at risk of coronavirus. According to the Last Prisoner Project, there are upwards of 40,000 marijuana-related prisoners who are at risk. You can jump on their website, www.lastprisonerproject.org, and they have a template there for you to send a note to your governor, and they identify the actions we should be taking. We need to get these prisoners out of prison.
Thank you so much for that, Andrew. Appreciate that update. So Michelle, what actions are the NCIA government relations team right in DC there taking on Capitol Hill right now to try and help small cannabis businesses during this difficult time? What are you seeing there? And how can we as an industry stay engaged through all this?
Sure. So, I think it's so important. I'm going to tackle the second question first. I think, it's so important to remain politically engaged during this time. And I know that might not seem at the forefront of everyone's mind as all of this goes on. But it is an election year, and it's important that we stay mindful of that, especially because as an industry and as a country, the people in power, make the decisions about things like coronavirus and funding and loans. And so it's incredibly important not to forget that the political process still goes on. And so there's a couple of different ways that people can continue doing that from the comfort of their own home while they social distance. Some of the easiest things and the first things that come to mind for people to do are to either call or write your legislators. Both of those, obviously, you can do from anywhere. And it's really important to continue doing that, whether you're going to talk about cannabis or your business and the issues that you're facing, or whether it's something else. These tips apply across the board, regardless of what it is you're talking to them about. And so, again, I would encourage people to call your legislators. You can email them. We have a great template letter on our website that people can access if they're interested in sending a template letter to their state officials. I would implore people, maybe a pro tip, if you will, would be to get in touch with district offices. Washington, D.C. has sort of hit pause. And not only that, but everybody thinks, oh, I should contact the D.C. office. And so people sometimes forget that there are people in their district offices locally who are also working for members of Congress. And they're a lot less inundated sometimes, although everybody is incredibly busy right now, of course, with everything that's going on. But that can be a good tip sometimes to help you get a response. In addition to those two things, it's such an important time to stay informed. Sometimes the news can feel overwhelming. And so, maybe staying informed isn't necessarily watching the 24-hour coverage of coronavirus on cable news. But, there's other ways to consume information, right? So read a book, get your mind off of things first off, but, pick up your favorite history or book about a politician or something like that, or about a movement that you care about, like the civil rights movement or anything like that, that you believe that, A, get your mind off of things, and B, can also give you great ideas about how to mobilize once this is behind us. Other ways to consume media, obviously podcasts. You can listen to things if reading isn't your cup of tea. I obviously encourage people to listen to NCIA Today, which is a great podcast that Bethany hosts that has actually become incredibly popular. And so kudos to you for that, Bethany, keeping everybody informed on what's going on across various sects of the industry. And then I think another really great way to stay involved right now is by getting involved in campaigns. And I know that can seem a little counterintuitive to people as we're staying home and social distancing, like, how can I get involved in a campaign? Well, that's the beauty of technology. You can go online, whether you want to volunteer your time for a specific candidate or a specific party. Maybe it's at the federal level, maybe it's at the state or local level, wherever you think needs your attention or you feel passionately about. But, getting involved with the campaign is a great way to still remain engaged with people. Like, we're all staying home and kind of craving that human interaction. We're doing webinars, we're having virtual happy hours. A campaign can be a great way to get to just make some calls, talk to people, talk to them about things you care about that you believe make a difference. I think that right now that's really, really inspiring. And it's important to remember that we have control over those things and power over those things. And lastly, I think just make sure you're staying up to date on social media. Again, maybe you're not reading the newspaper every day, but follow your local member of Congress or local officials or your senators on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or on all of them, because so many candidates are doing Facebook Lives and Instagram town halls. And that can be a really, really great way to still participate and actually be able to ask questions and have a conversation while we're still all mostly working from home. So I think those are some of the ways that we can stay involved. But to pivot back to your first question about, what are we doing here in DC, it's obviously been an incredibly, interesting time for all of us, and Congress's first business of order during this was obviously working on some of the couple economic packages that they've passed. We know that the stimulus bill is likely to pass the House of Representatives today and go to the president's desk. And so while those discussions were going on, however, we were still having conversations with offices just about how we can ensure that we're providing relief to cannabis businesses. In that vein, on March 12th, the Small Business Administration set aside about $2 million for small businesses for all different kinds of loans, 7A loans, microloans, disaster relief loans. And unfortunately, because cannabis is still a Schedule I substance and is not recognized by the federal government, cannabis businesses are not eligible for that, for those funds. And so we, alongside some of our industry partners who we're so lucky to work with, the Global Alliance for Cannabis Commerce, the Minority Cannabis Business Association, Cannabis Trade Federation, the National Cannabis Roundtable, and ourselves, all sent a letter to congressional leadership imploring them that cannabis businesses are eligible for those funds if they could include language. While that language did not get included yet in any of the packages we've seen so far, there is already talk about another phase 4 package that will likely be going forward sometime in the coming months. It's kind of yet to be seen. And what we want to do with that is, again, continue to talk to our offices who are our friends and our champions about small businesses, about the Safe Banking Act. We continue to talk with them. We are also working on other letters to governors and state officials, with that coalition, to make sure that the industry is all rowing in the same direction. It's so important to be unified at this time. And so that is our main priority, is making sure that we are all rowing in the same direction to get what we need done. But the good news is there's also other avenues to try and do this. And that's what we're exploring now as well. Many people who've been involved in the cannabis industry for a long time are aware that the Appropriations Process is a way by which we've been able to get some action out of the federal government. Essentially, it's mostly been tying their hands from enforcement, primarily in medical cannabis states. But there are other ways that we can utilize the Appropriations Process. For instance, Senator Jackie Rosen, a great cannabis champion out of the state of Nevada, just sent a Dear Colleague letter around to her colleagues in the Senate, imploring them to sign on to a letter that is asking the Appropriations Committee in the Senate to include language in the appropriations bills that would prohibit the Small Business Administration from denying those certain loan applications to cannabis businesses. So there's a couple different avenues. Although it seems like things have hit pause, we're lucky again to live in the digital era. We are still in touch with all of our champions and friends, whether it's on the phone or via email. And I just want everybody to know that the people and the offices that we work with the most have been very dialed in on this. They've been asking, what are you hearing? What are your businesses experiencing? And so I would really implore anybody, if you have any personal stories about what's been going on with you or your business in the age of coronavirus. We've heard some stories of people, because they can only do curbside sales are passing cash back and forth in their parking lots. Obviously, it's incredibly unsafe. I've relayed that to some offices who are very concerned. So if you have any stories like that, feel free to drop us a line, put it in the chat box. Please comment on Facebook. There's a multitude of ways to get in touch with us, private message us if that makes you feel more comfortable. But I am actively looking for some of those stories to continue telling our friends on the Hill so that they understand that the situation is serious and dire for cannabis businesses.
Wow, thank you for that, Michelle. Sounds like some great efforts. And I hope some of our Direct to Plant audience members will send some of those stories to Michelle. They're very helpful. So as far as what's happening on the Hill, what the House and the Senate are doing, what's moving and shaking or stalling and breaking, as it were, there on Capitol Hill, Michelle?
Sure. So like I mentioned, I mean, the big effort for the last couple of weeks has been about this phase 3 stimulus bill, or the CARES Act, as it's been called. Now that, again, that's looking like it's going to be passed by the House today and go on to the president's desk to be turned into law, we are going to now pivot and take some time to do some outreach to offices, again, to talk about that phase 4 bill and, again, the appropriations process to see what we can do there. The appropriations process usually shakes out typically in early summer, about May, June, sometimes going into July lately, since Congress sometimes is a little late on the appropriations process. But I think that's all a little bit in flux right now, considering everyone's schedules and going into recess, and we don't really know how that's going to shake out. But regardless, the talk now is about what's going to be in that phase 4 bill. And rather than having 1 week to try to lobby offices and mobilize our members and other allies of ours and coalition members, we're going to have a couple weeks. And that makes a big difference, again, in just strategy and figuring out where is an in for us. And so, again, I think there's a couple avenues that we're exploring. Obviously, the Small Business Administration and the Small Business Committee, working with them is probably priority number 1. In addition to that, we're also exploring other avenues by which we might be able to help in the phase 4 bill. And that includes, maybe having some language that talks about businesses that have been deemed essential in states, right? And we know that cannabis businesses in many places, not all, at least not all adult use states, have been deemed essential, but maybe we have an avenue there to work with that. And then also, another thing I just want to mention is that, these cannabis businesses are eligible, they are under the Family First Act, are going to be not forced to, but, will have to provide things like unemployment insurance and paid family and sick leave. And although cannabis businesses are not eligible for any of those loans or the funding that other businesses and other industries are getting, they are held to those unemployment mandates and the family leave mandates. And so there's obviously a bit of the right hand and the left hand not talking here. And so our job at NCIA and with our other coalition members is to sort of bridge that gap again and make sure that we can help out wherever possible. And lastly is just, we're also seeing what other avenues we can explore for things like the Safe Banking Act. We haven't forgotten about that. If there's a possibility to attach that to something like a phase 4 bill, we might be exploring those options. But again, our time now is talking with all of our allies and champions on the Hill and making sure that, again, they've heard those stories, they understand the need, and then again, strategizing for what's the best way forward for us.
Great, really appreciate that update, Michelle. Just a reminder for our Facebook audience, please leave any questions you may have in the comments and we will see them. We'll have a Q&A session toward the end here. If you're on Twitter, you can also tweet your comments and questions at NCIA.org. And finally, for those of you tuning in here on Zoom, you can use that chat feature button right at the bottom there to ask a question for Andrew or Michelle, and we'll get to those toward the end. So moving right along, Andrew, let's shift over to some of the broader issues going on behind the scenes with NCIA's Policy Council. What has the group been working on recently, and what's coming down the pipeline that NCIA members can expect to look out for?
Yeah, thanks, Bethany. First, I just want to say, NCIA and the cannabis industry is so lucky to have Michelle in DC looking out for us. So thank you for all you do, Michelle in DC, for us. one of the bills that I want to just comment on is the MORE Act. I like the MORE Act. It's a descheduling bill. It's got social equity provisions. It's a great thing, but it's not perfect. It needs a regulatory plan, and it does, in passing, sort of comment that a regulatory plan should look more like tobacco than alcohol, and we disagree with that. We do have our own regulatory plan. It's on our website, thecannabisindustry.org. The Policy Council put that out last October, so please check it out. I do want to just say a little bit about the importance of descheduling as it relates to MORE, because from my perspective, this is the most important thing that the cannabis industry can be doing. What we're seeing across the states is that the era of prohibition is crumbling. 90% of the population favors medicinal marijuana. 33 states have enacted medicinal programs. The FDA has approved multiple medicinal marijuana drugs. Congress has protected medicinal marijuana for 7 years now, and Congress recently descheduled hemp. But cannabis is still a Schedule I drug, like heroin and LSD. It is so absurd. Like, every time I say this out loud, I just can't even believe it. Meth is a Schedule II drug. So according to the US government, cannabis has no medicinal value and is highly addictive. Both are completely fundamentally irreconcilable with reality. One blatant example of that is that the Department of Health and Human Services applied for and obtained a federal patent in 2003 on the medicinal use of marijuana. And as I said before, the FDA has approved medicines, and the medicine is legal in 33 states. So we know it is just fundamentally not true. It should not be a Schedule I drug. And if we deschedule, we fix almost everything. We fix 280E, we fix banking, we move from the DEA's authority to the FDA's authority, or to TTB's authority. We have a pathway to social equity reform. We facilitate research, and there's a public safety imperative, because we start regulating and testing products at the national level. As most of you probably already know, NCIA has a policy council. It's a group right now of about 35 entrepreneurs, doctors, lawyers, scientists, and experts in cannabis policy. And together, we decide on what we believe are the most important issues facing the cannabis industry at the time. And we write white papers about those issues. We build advocacy campaigns around them, and we do events. As the vape crisis started, we formed a task force, and we wrote some op-eds, we wrote some blogs, and ultimately we're writing a white paper, we wrote a white paper, which again, you can find on our website. If you click on Policy and Policy Council, you can see the whole library of all the papers that we've written. And after writing that paper, we realized that the illicit market was the main culprit. And so we planned an Illicit Market Summit. Let me just tell you a little bit about the illicit market, because it's just not working for anybody. The illicit market is putting consumers at risk by offering untested, unregulated, and dangerous products. This includes vape cartridges that people are making in their garage, filled with additives that aren't intended for inhalation. Pop-up dispensaries are selling illicit products, unregulated products, untested products to unwitting consumers who can't tell the difference between a real dispensary and a pop-up dispensary. This is mostly happening in Los Angeles. And then people are making counterfeit packaging, ready to fill, with fake lab results and batch numbers and barcodes. It's just disgraceful what's happening out there. And these illicit market operators are posing a threat to the legal cannabis industry, because you've got these entrepreneurs who are spending millions of dollars on licenses, hundreds of thousands of dollars on compliance, and then they're competing against unregulated, untested, untaxed illicit products. And law enforcement has no idea what to do. So we need to make certain that reliable and safe products are being sold in the regulated market. And, we've talked a lot about the coronavirus here today, but, trust in the supply chain is key here. We need to make people believe that the laboratory testing that's being done is accurate, that there's traceability. So if we need to do a recall, we can do that. If we've learned anything from this disease, it's that trust in the supply chain in cannabis is essential. And so we held an Illicit Market Summit on February 19th in Boston. We had 68 people sitting at a table for an entire day, from 8 in the morning until 5:30 with only a lunch break. We had federal, state, and local law enforcement. We had tech companies. We had social equity experts, and we had multi-state operators, cannabis companies in the room. And out of it, we learned some key takeaways. And if you get on our website again, you can see those key takeaways in a blog that we published most recently. I'll mention just a couple of them. We need to help law enforcement find alternatives to arrest and incarceration. We need the industry to find a pathway for illicit market operators to enter the legal market. We need to find a forum for collaboration with law enforcement, so we're not scrambling when a crisis happens to communicate with law enforcement. And we need to be speaking with one voice. The industry needs to be saying the same thing. And all that is really important. We're going to be issuing a report soon on the illicit market, so keep your eye out on that. We had planned a subsequent law enforcement summit but in June at our next trade show in San Francisco, but because of the coronavirus, that trade show has been postponed until the end of September, beginning of October. So we hope to plan that event during that time, during that trade show. So what's next for the Policy Council? We are working on a few white papers right now, intellectual property white paper, which I think is going to be super interesting. It's how do you protect your trademark? How do you apply for a federal patent in cannabis? How do you protect designations of origin? So much like Champagne is protected or Bordeaux is protected in France, we want to protect the farmers in Humboldt who are growing the best cannabis in the country, right? So how do we do that? We're doing a paper on interstate commerce. We believe that the best cannabis that's being grown in California and in Oregon should be able to be sold in places where it's much more costly to grow cannabis because you have to grow it indoors. Environmental sustainability, we're working on a paper. We should be a leader in water conservation and electricity conservation. We shouldn't be, leveraging double packaging, for instance. We should be a leader. And so on Earth Day, we're going to be releasing a summary, executive summary of that paper. And we'll be doing a webinar on environmental sustainability on Earth Day as well. In the pipeline coming up are papers on gender parity. So, the cannabis industry should be leading in making sure that women are represented in the C-suite as much as men, that they're getting paid the same amount as men, that they're on boards equally represented as men. And thank you, Gail Rand, who's agreed to help me lead that paper. The medicine of cannabis, we're going to be doing a paper on that, and that couldn't be more timely. We've got some doctors lined up to help us with that paper, and we're looking for a couple more. So if there are physicians out there who have expertise in the medicine of cannabis, please ping me. And lastly, we're going to be working on a paper on taxes. One of the reasons that the illicit market is thriving in California is because state taxes and municipal taxes are so high. How do we get those taxes down so that they cover regulatory costs, but they don't force people into the illicit market because the prices are so high? The last thing I'll comment on is, one of the things the Policy Council tries to do is release public comments to executive agencies who are asking questions from experts. They want to know, what the cannabis industry thinks on certain issues. And so right now there are 3 federal agencies seeking comment, DEA, FDA, and NIDA. So I'll say a couple words about each, but I'm going to really focus on the DEA because that's, I think, where I want folks watching this webinar to pay attention. This is complicated stuff, and I had to turn to some expert advice here. Jody Avergun is the former chief of staff at the DEA and a partner at Cadwalader, one of the biggest, most reputable, oldest law firms in the country. She's in DC, but they're based in New York, and she's super smart on these issues of federal significance, particularly when it comes to issues related to the DEA. And so I asked her to help me break this down for us. So thank you, Jody. The DEA is asking for public comments on their notice of proposed rulemaking on marijuana research. Comments are due May 22nd. As you probably know, the University of Mississippi has basically had the exclusive rights to research marijuana for quite some time. And we need research to know all the medical benefits of cannabis. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence that cannabis helps for lots of different ailments. We have some FDA clinical trials, but there's a great deal we don't know, and we need more research, and we need data. Enter the DEA. So let's think about this for a minute. Do we really want the DEA in charge of cannabis research? I don't. But that's where we find ourselves today. So we have to ask ourselves whether these proposed rules will actually facilitate cannabis research, because we are taxpayers. The DEA works for us. Is this what we want? Do we want the DEA in charge of research? I think not. And if not, then we need to fight them. We need to unite as an industry. We need to file comments that say this is a bad idea. And I'm going to do that shortly. So here's sort of the background. Here's the history. In August of 2016, the DEA announced that they wanted to expand research into the medicinal properties of marijuana by increasing the supply of marijuana available for research. Sounds great, right? Sure. They said that it would start accepting applications for marijuana cultivators as long as the newly registered growers would sell their supply only to DEA licensed marijuana researchers. Since that announcement, over 30 entities have applied to be registered to manufacture marijuana to supply researchers. And the DEA has done nothing. 2016, they've acted on none of them, not one. So a lawsuit was filed recently in DC asking the DC Circuit to intervene and to force the DEA to act. And that's why the DEA recently issued this notice for public comment. So what does the notice say? It says that DEA is bound by the Single Convention Narcotic Drugs from 1961 in how it licenses cultivators of marijuana for medical research. This is the first time, as far as we know, a regulation mentions the Single Convention Treaty as a separate law that a registrant must comply with to obtain a registration. This is pretty ironic. Think about this. This administration, the Trump administration, has opposed the International Criminal Court. They've opposed the UN. They've opposed NATO. And suddenly, one of their agencies is saying that we have to comply with an international treaty from 1961. So DEA now proposes new regulations require licensed growers to transfer all of its output to the DEA. The new regulation would exclude research for FDA-approved drugs. So this would not apply to companies that are doing clinical trials, but it would apply to everybody else. Here's the kicker. The DEA will consider prior compliance with federal, not state narcotics laws in granting or denying the registration. That means technically, since all cannabis companies that are operating currently are technically in violation of federal law, they won't qualify to provide cannabis to the DEA for research. This doesn't bode well for applicants with existing grow operations who may be state compliant, but are violating federal law. And then what happens to these 30 applications that have been sitting around for 4 years? They say no new applications will be considered until all of the applications that were accepted for filing before the effective date of the rule have been granted or denied. Given that there's a 4-year backlog on these pending applications, it could be quite a while before any of these new applications even get considered. This is likely to drive current applicants to withdraw their pending applications and start all over again. So what are the key takeaways here? This grants a great deal of authority and autonomy to DEA, a law enforcement agency, not a health or a research agency, a law enforcement agency. This is exactly the opposite of what we want to be doing here. It disallows companies that are currently breaking federal law from even applying. It creates a cumbersome procedure with huge administrative hassles for everyone and probably large costs. It's likely designed to discourage applications, which is exactly the opposite of what we want to do, and it's likely to lead to additional delays. So my response is, hell no. If you're listening to this, think about it, read the public comments, file your own letter, reach out to us with your ideas because we will be filing comments within the next 60 days. I'll also mention that NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, is asking for comments on dosing research. They're wondering whether 5 milligrams is the right dose per person in order to determine the level of consumption. Those responses are due on May 1st, and we've asked our science committee to take a look at that technical question. And then lastly, I'll just mention that the FDA reopened their comments. We submitted comments before the due date, but FDA saying they didn't receive enough comments on CBD. So if you're still interested, that comment period is open again. The Policy Council is always accepting new applicants. So if you're interested in applying and helping us do the work that we do, please shoot me an email, andrew@thecannabisindustry.org. Thanks for listening.
Wow, thank you for that, Andrew. And I appreciate the tenacity of you and the Policy Council to address all of these issues this year. So looking forward to all that content. Before we get final words, a reminder to the audience, if you're joining us through Facebook, please leave any comments, any questions in the comments, and we will see them. If you're on Twitter, you can tweet your comments and questions at NCIA.org. And if you're tuning in through Zoom, there is a little chat feature at the bottom there where you can ask your question of Andrew or Michelle. So before we turn to the Q&A, any final thoughts from you today, Michelle?
Sure. I think the final thought that I just like to leave everybody with is, again, not to harp too much on coronavirus, but I do think that, it's, again, on the forefront of all of our minds as we live through it. And I just want to, really reiterate to people that although it seems overwhelming and it feels like that's all Congress is doing and everything is hit pause, that is very much not the case. Like I mentioned earlier, we are here, we are talking to offices. Just because we can't walk in the halls of Congress doesn't mean that we are all not working from home. Staffers are calling, we're working. I just want to make sure that during this time, again, that we're staying as an association engaged with our members so that we can hear from you. And again, reiterate whatever it is that you have to say and your stories and your needs up to those halls, not halls right now, but to those offices that can help you out. And so I would just ask everybody to, again, stay engaged with us, stay engaged the political process, again, whether that has to do with coronavirus, whether that has to do with the presidential election, whether that has to do with your state or local elections. I think that it's, we have more time now than ever to do some research and think about things that we're passionate about and really make a difference. I think that that's really actually a beautiful, really positive silver lining of this, is that it reminds us that we all have the power to still make a difference. And again, the political process and elections are such a huge piece of that. If you're not happy with who's representing you and what they're doing, then this is your moment, because November is coming, and whether coronavirus likes it or not, and we're going to have elections, and it's important just not to lose sight of that. So I think that's one of the parting words. And the other thing I just want to mention before we turn it over to questions is that we unfortunately also had to postpone our 10th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days. We usually do that in May. Obviously, given everything that's going on, we made the difficult decision to postpone that, but we have new dates for it. It is September 15th through the 17th, which will hopefully not be too hot here in DC, but we hope that people will be able to mark their calendars for that new date. We're actually, excited. It's funny how the world works. Like I said, November is coming, and, I think it's going to be really, really impactful to have hundreds, hopefully, of our members come out to DC less than 2 months before a presidential and just election day in general. And so I would just implore people, I know it's a little bit in flux right now, and we all kind of don't know what's going on with booking flights or anything like that, but hopefully we're in the clear by September. So maybe you could get a good deal on airfare, who knows? But just want to mention that that we're sad that we won't be seeing everybody in May, but don't forget about us. And we hope to have you here in DC in September so that you can talk about all things banking, 280E, descheduling, and small business to members of Congress. So we hope to see you guys then.
Great. Yeah, lobby days will be a great way to wrap up the summer. So before we jump into questions, any final words from you today, Andrew?
I would just say kudos to the governors. We've seen a lack of leadership at the federal level, both on coronavirus and on cannabis. But the governors are stepping up and leading, and it's really cool to watch. There are some in particular who are shining examples, but all around the states, we're seeing governors step up, and we're seeing the cannabis industry thrive during a really tough time.
Yeah, and one last thing I want to say, Bethany, is that, it's such a weird time right now, frankly. But again, just like Andrew said, I have been so inspired by tales of our industry banding together. I have heard about members in the industry who have masks because people literally have to wear masks, in different sectors of the industry, who are donating those to hospitals, who are making hand sanitizer, who are really banding together. And those stories, again, are going to be really, really impactful when we tell members of Congress or anybody, frankly, just to be a good human being, that we are members of our communities who care about our patients, our consumers, our neighbors. And so I would just also say to everybody to keep up the good work and how inspiring that is.
Great. I totally agree, Michelle. So let us jump into questions from our audiences on Facebook, Twitter, and those tuning into the webinar.
Notice those hands are all 6 feet apart.
Everyone in that picture is physical distancing, we promise. Let's start with a very active member of NCIA, Jason Horst. His question is there an opportunity in the Phase 4 bill to get the substance of the Safe Banking Act passed, at least with regard to those businesses deemed essential by state or local authorities, given the cash handling issues addressed earlier? Great question.
Well, I think the answer is yes. I think that the opportunities abound for what we can do in the Phase 4 bill. I would say right now, the first priority is to, again, figure out what we all want. Because again, NCIA doesn't want to ask for something different than MCBA is asking for, that CTF is asking for, because then we won't get anything. And so it's really, really important now more than ever to have a unified voice. I have already been in discussion with Congressman Perlmutter and Senator Merkley's office about the different opportunities and ways in which we might be able to attach SAFE. We haven't actually had a discussion yet about tying the Safe Banking Act to the essential businesses piece. That's kind of been two separate things. But again, all options are on the table right now. And so I absolutely think it's possible. It just, again, we take our cues a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of times from what these offices want. We have to defer to them sometimes and what they feel comfortable doing as the sponsors of our legislation. And so thank you, Jason, for this idea. I'm gonna hit them up after this and ask if they have any thoughts or if they've been having those discussions. But fortunately, I think the short answer is yes.
Would you add anything to that?
No, I think Michelle covered it.
Great. Let's see, I'm seeing a question about New Jersey. If their ballot question is moving forward, if the campaign is moving there in New Jersey. Do either of you have any insight about moving forward with legalization in the state of New Jersey?
I personally don't. It's more of a question for MPP. If you get on MPP's website, you could probably glean some information about New Jersey there.
Yep. Marijuana Policy Project is a great organization that's been involved on the ground, state to state, working to legalize in this state-by-state dominoes falling model that we've seen the last few years for sure. Here's another question from Twitter. In addition to the common hygiene that we already know, are there specific precautions that producers or consumers could take around coronavirus to protect themselves? Anything coming to mind for either of you?
I think the most important thing at the end of the day is we are not medical professionals. We are not healthcare professionals. And so I don't think that it would necessarily be prudent of me to give advice about that, especially considering the seriousness of the situation that we're in right now. But that being said, I think that what we need to do is follow what the CDC and the World Health Organization say, and follow those guidelines, follow what your state is saying, and follow them to a T. Take every precaution necessary, wash your hands. If you have masks, use them, whatever that may be. But again, I would err on the side of listening to the professionals in this case. But I hope that you guys stay safe, and we appreciate you still working.
Yes. I would add to that, as someone who works with NCIA members on content, there have been quite a few blogs coming through from our members, from HR professionals and facilities professionals, with that kind of extra level of advice. So I certainly encourage our viewers to log on to our website, thecannabisindustry.org, and check out some of the blogs that our members and committees have been submitting that expand on that very question. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions. There's one more here before we wrap. Are cannabis company employees eligible for recovery rebates? I would think so if they file individual tax returns. Wow, I'm not sure the answer to that one.
I think if we're talking about the $1,200 checks, if I understand this right, and I hope that I am, I believe the answer is yes. So that's the short answer. Again, the stimulus package that came out the other day is very, very, very long, and so we're also going through that and trying to suss out exactly which pieces will apply to the cannabis industry, which pieces won't apply. Like I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, not all of these things are going to apply to the cannabis industry, just because of our status at the federal level. But the good news is that a lot of these funds are going to be sent to the states to allocate them, and for states to deem how they need to use those funds. And so, if you're in a state like Colorado, for instance, I would assume that, Governor Polis is gonna be there for the cannabis industry and help where he can. And so I think that it's important to remember that it's not, although it's a bill passed by Congress, it is going to have that trickle down effect, if you will, to the states. And then hopefully they can sort of suss that out and deem, what they want to do with it.
Makes sense. One more question just came in, and then I think we'll cut off. States are relaxing rules around online signature gathering for ballot initiatives. Will this benefit any cannabis legislation going forward?
Sure hope so.
Agree. Okay, well, as we wrap up, I do want to mention NCIA is responding to this change in our world by increasing our digital sponsorship offerings. They're available across all of NCIA's digital properties, and packages start as low as $250. So if digital sponsorships are something that interests you as an NCIA member, please email bizdev@thecannabisindustry.org or give us a call at 888-683-5650. Andrew and Michelle, thank you both so much for spending time with me this morning, updating our audience on what's going on at the federal level. Hope you have a great...
Wait, we forgot to mention that Bethany's podcast was top 25 on Apple, is that right?
Almost. So yeah, NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice is NCIA's weekly podcast. We have been running it for about 3.5 years, since the 2016 presidential election. And we are up and down in the top 50 for US business news on Apple Podcasts. So you can find that on any of the platforms you listen to podcasts. Just search for NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice.
Awesome. Thanks, Bethany.
Thanks, everyone. Stay healthy and safe out there.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and join our next educational webinar in the future.